What if the first people who ever taught you about love also taught you to doubt yourself? What if the very home that shaped you rewrote your memories, dismissed your feelings, and convinced you that your truth didn't matter? That is how gaslighting begins. Not in adulthood, not only in toxic relationships, but often in childhood. Imagine this. You speak up as a child, saying, "That hurt me." Instead of comfort, you hear, "You're too sensitive." Nothing happened. Your body knows the sting is real, but your mind starts to bend. If they say it wasn't real, maybe it wasn't. Or years later, you recall a painful family moment. You describe it, hoping someone else remembers. But the response comes quickly. That's not how it happened. Stop imagining things. Suddenly, your memory feels flimsy, like a page being erased as you read it. These aren't just small denials. They're psychological fractures, and over time, they teach you something profound and dangerous. That your inner world is untrustworthy, and the family's version of reality must replace your own. Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest harm comes not from outer misfortune, but from inner division. Family gaslighting creates exactly that division. On one side, your feelings, the ache, the fear, the sadness. On the other, the voice of authority that says, "No, that's not real. You're imagining things." The child cannot hold both, so one side collapses. And usually, it's the child's truth that gets buried. Alice Miller, in The Drama of the Gifted Child, described how this silencing works. Sensitive, perceptive children notice what others don't. Tension, unfairness, cruelty. But in families that cannot face these realities, the child's sensitivity becomes a problem to be erased. Instead of receiving validation, they receive denial. Instead of being seen, they are told they are wrong. And so, the very qualities that could have been strengths are twisted into sources of shame. Think about how this plays out. A child says, "I'm scared." The parent responds, "There's nothing to be scared of." Don't be silly. A child says, "I'm hurt." The parent replies, "Stop exaggerating." You're fine. A child recalls an incident later. "You yelled at me yesterday." The parent insists, "That never happened." Each time, the message is the same. Don't trust your feelings. Don't trust your memory. Trust us instead. And so, the child learns to doubt the body's signals, learns to quiet the voice inside, learns to accept the family story even when it doesn't match their lived experience. This is why, as adults, so many people fall easily into gaslighting dynamics in relationships, workplaces, and friendships. It's not because they are weak. It's because they have been rehearsing this dance since childhood. They have been trained to hand over their perception in exchange for belonging. Erich Fromm once observed that man's deepest struggle is between what he experiences and what he is told he should experience. Nowhere is this clearer than in families where gaslighting takes root. The child learns not to ask, "What do I feel?" but instead, "What am I supposed to feel?" And here is the cruel twist. When you grow up in such a system, you don't only doubt your feelings, you doubt yourself. You carry a constant suspicion that something is wrong with you, not with the people who denied you. This shows up in subtle ways. At work, you bring up a concern, but when your boss brushes it off, you immediately assume you overreacted. With friends, you sense tension, but when no one else acknowledges it, you tell yourself you must have imagined it. In relationships, you voice your needs, but when your partner dismisses them, you quickly silence yourself, ashamed for even asking. Everywhere you go, the family training echoes. Don't trust yourself. Others know better. Carl Rogers spoke about unconditional positive regard, the experience of being accepted as you are. Gaslighting in families creates its opposite, conditional acceptance that only arrives when you deny yourself. The child learns, I am lovable only when I silence my truth. And the cost is immense, because once you have silenced yourself long enough, the silence becomes automatic. You don't even notice it happening. You doubt before you speak. You shrink before anyone else needs to push you down. But here is the important truth. If this describes you, you're not broken, you're not weak. You are shaped, trained, conditioned to abandon yourself because others abandoned you first. And just as you learn to doubt yourself, you can learn to trust again. Alice Miller wrote that the only way out is to reclaim the child's truth, to finally say, yes, it happened, yes, I felt it, and yes, it mattered. That reclaiming is not easy. It comes with grief, anger, even fear. But it is also the doorway out of the fog. So if any of this resonates, take a breath. The patterns you live with today were not freely chosen. They were carved into you by the denials of those you depended on most, which means the shame you carry does not belong to you. In the next part, we'll explore how these family patterns take shape, how scapegoating, silence, and rewritten stories form the invisible architecture of childhood gaslighting, and more importantly, how understanding these origins loosens the grip of guilt, creating space for you to rebuild trust in your own reality. Gaslighting in families doesn't begin with malice. It often begins with fear, shame, or denial passed down from one generation to the next. Parents who cannot face their own pain often rewrite the world around them so they don't have to. And in doing so, they rewrite their children's worlds too. Think of a parent who grew up in hardship. To survive, they learn to minimize their own suffering. When their child later says, "I'm sad," the parent answers, "That's nothing." You don't know what real sadness is. What looks like dismissal in the present is also a repetition of the past. The parent cannot tolerate the child's reality because it stirs up their own unresolved wounds, so they erase it. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we cannot accept, so we push them away. Parents who have buried their own fear or shame often project that shadow onto their children. When a child expresses vulnerability, it triggers the parent's hidden pain, and instead of embracing it, the parent denies it. The words come sharp. Stop being dramatic. You're exaggerating. The child is not only left alone with their feeling, they are taught to distrust it. Alice Miller argued that many children are born gifted in the sense of being deeply perceptive. They notice the moods in the room, the small cracks in family life, the truths everyone else avoids. But in families where honesty is dangerous, these children are punished for their perception. They become scapegoats, labeled as too sensitive, too difficult, too much. Their gift is turned against them, and the family maintains its comfort by sacrificing the child's truth. Consider how scapegoating works. A sibling bullies you, mocks you, undermines you. When you finally speak up instead of protection, you hear, "Don't start fights." You always make trouble. The attention shifts from the bully's behavior to your protest. Over time, you learn that silence keeps the peace, while truth brings punishment. Or think of how family stories are rewritten. Perhaps you remember a frightening night when your parents argued loudly. The fear in your chest was real, but years later, when you bring it up, the story has been edited. It wasn't a big fight. You're remembering wrong. What you lived is erased, and the new family narrative takes its place. You're left holding a memory that no one else validates, and so you begin to doubt yourself instead of doubting the story. This is not simply about lying. It is about survival strategies turned into family law. Many parents rewrite reality because admitting the truth feels unbearable. To admit they shouted too much, ignored too often, or failed to protect, you would mean facing their own guilt. So instead, they deny. And the child, unable to hold on to truth without support, lets it go. Over time, this shapes not just individual moments, but the entire structure of the child's mind. Gaslighting teaches you to split from yourself. On one side, the raw feelings, the body that trembles, the eyes that tear up, the heart that races. On the other, the constant chorus of family voices saying, "It's fine. Nothing happened." You're imagining it. When those two collide, the child chooses the family. Because without the family, the child cannot survive. And this choice, repeated again and again, becomes internalized. Eventually, the parent doesn't even need to deny you. You deny yourself. You feel anger rising, but you swallow it before anyone else notices. You sense tension in the room, but you laugh it off before anyone can dismiss you. You gaslight yourself because you have learned that your truth has no safe place to land. Gábor Maté, writing about trauma, observed that children will almost always choose attachment over authenticity. If they must give up their true feelings in order to preserve the bond with their parent, they will. It is a tragic but adaptive choice. Because in childhood, survival depends on belonging. This is why so many adults later find themselves trapped in cycles of self-doubt. The original wound wasn't just the denial itself, it was the survival lesson attached to it. Don't trust yourself if you want to stay loved. That script plays out for decades, long after the original family home has been left behind. Think of Daniel from earlier. As a boy, when he confronted unfairness at home, he was told, "Stop exaggerating." Now, as a man in a corporate office, when his boss contradicts himself, Daniel immediately assumes the problem is him. The family training echoes in his workplace. Or Maya, who grew up hearing, "Don't be dramatic." In her adult relationship, every time her partner denies a promise, she falls silent. Not because she believes him fully, but because silence feels safer than the risk of being dismissed again. And Lena, who spent her childhood being told she was too emotional. As a mother herself, she now hesitates when her own child cries. A small voice whispers inside her, "Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe they are too." She must fight against the inherited instinct to deny feelings, even her child's. This is the generational power of gaslighting. It doesn't just distort one memory. It builds an entire architecture of doubt that follows you everywhere. Verena Kast, the Jungian analyst, described how family myths become stronger than individual experience. When everyone in the family insists on a story, the lone dissenter feels crushed under the weight of collective denial. To break from the myth feels like betrayal. And so, many children abandon their own truth rather than risk being cast out. That is why family gaslighting leaves such a deep scar. It is not simply a matter of being told you were wrong. It is the repeated experience of choosing between belonging and reality. And for a child, belonging always wins. So the question becomes, what happens when you carry this training into adulthood? You walk into friendships, workplaces, and relationships already predisposed to abandon yourself. Gaslighting doesn't surprise you. It feels familiar. It feels like home. But here is the paradox. The familiarity of family gaslighting is what makes it so hard to see. Adults who grew up in these dynamics often mistake self-doubt for humility, repression for resilience, silence for peace. They don't recognize that the very skills that once kept them safe are now keeping them trapped. This is where awareness begins. To name what happened in childhood is not about blaming parents endlessly. It is about breaking the silence, lifting the weight of guilt off your own shoulders, and seeing that the self-doubt you carry was taught to you. In the next part, we'll look at how awareness becomes leverage, how naming the mechanism, seeing gaslighting for what it is, creates cracks in the pattern, and how even small acts of self-trust begin to loosen the hold of family myths, making space for a different future. If this journey eases something inside you, stay with us. Subscribe, and each step will bring a little more clarity. Thank you. There comes a moment when the script you've lived in for years begins to falter. It usually isn't dramatic. There's no shouting, no explosion. More often, it's a quiet pause, a flicker of recognition that something doesn't add up. Maybe you're at a family gathering. The old jokes begin, the ones that always land on you. Everyone laughs, and you feel that familiar heat in your chest. But this time, instead of laughing along, you think, why is this funny to them but painful to me? The moment feels different, not because they changed, but because you noticed. Or you're in a relationship and your partner says the familiar line, "You're too sensitive." For years, those words sent you spiraling, but tonight, something inside you stiffens. You remember the child who heard those same words at the kitchen table, and you realize, this is the same script. I've been here before. Or you're at work, raising a concern that is brushed aside with a smile. You're overreacting. Instead of collapsing into self-doubt, you pause. You feel the unease in your body and think, that unease is real, whether or not they see it. These moments don't erase the years of gaslighting, but they are cracks. And through the cracks, light enters. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole by integrating what was once divided. Gaslighting divides you, the part that feels and the part that denies. Awareness begins to stitch those parts back together. You start to hold both truths at once. I feel this. They deny it. Their denial does not erase my feeling. This shift seems small, but it's radical. Because gaslighting thrives on unconsciousness. It wants you to doubt without knowing why. The moment you see the pattern, recognize the tactic, you begin to loosen its hold. Take Maya. For years, whenever her partner denied a promise, she scrambled to defend herself, pulling out texts, replaying conversations, desperate for proof. But the proof never set her free. It only dragged her deeper into the fight. Recently, she has begun to try something new. When her partner says, "I never promised that," she takes a breath and answers simply, "I remember it differently." Then she stops. It feels awkward, unfinished, even terrifying. But in that unfinished space, she discovers something powerful. She doesn't need to win the argument to hold her truth. She only needs to stop abandoning it. Or Daniel, who started keeping notes of workplace contradictions. At first, he wrote them down to prepare for a fight, but he soon realized the notes were for him. Each line of his own handwriting became an anchor, a reminder that his memory could be trusted. The gaslighting still stung, but it no longer swallowed him whole. And Lena, who grew up being told she was too emotional, she has begun a small ritual. When doubt rises, when she wants to scold herself for overreacting, she places her hand on her chest and whispers, "It's okay to feel what I feel." It sounds simple, but to her, it feels revolutionary. Because for the first time, she is not repeating her family's denial. She's giving herself permission. Carl Rogers called this unconditional positive regard, the radical act of accepting someone as they are. Lena is finally learning to extend that regard inward. These are turning points, not grand victories, but subtle shifts, shifts that matter. Because awareness is not just about noticing others, it's about noticing yourself again, the tension in your shoulders, the heat in your chest, the quiet whisper in your mind that says, "This isn't right." These signals are not weaknesses, they are your compass. And every time you honor them, the old family script loses power. But here's the paradox of awareness. It often comes with grief. Grief for the years spent doubting yourself. Grief for the child silenced again and again. Grief for the reality that your family was not always the safe place you wanted it to be. Verena Kast wrote that awareness often awakens mourning. At first, it feels like a loss. The loss of innocence, of certainty, of the comforting lie that maybe it really was your fault. But grief is also movement. It means you are no longer trapped in the fog. You are walking through it, even if slowly. And this grief matters, because without mourning, awareness can turn brittle. You may see the pattern, but still feel paralyzed by it. Mourning allows you to process, to soften, to accept that what was denied did happen and that it hurt. Awareness also reshapes relationships. Once you start to notice the gaslighting, you begin to make different choices. You don't always confront. Sometimes you simply observe. Sometimes you let silence do the work. Sometimes you step back. What matters is that you are no longer handing over your entire reality to someone else. This doesn't mean the gaslighting stops. Families often resist awareness fiercely. When you begin to name what you see, you may be met with even stronger denials. Now you're rewriting history. You always make things worse. But inside, something is different. Their words no longer erase you as easily as before. The cracks have widened. And slowly, a new question arises. Instead of asking, "What if they're right?" you begin to ask, "What if I'm right?" This question is the seed of transformation. Because gaslighting thrives on certainty. Certainty that the family story is stronger than your story. The moment you doubt that certainty, the power shifts. Think again of Maya, Daniel, and Lena. None of them have escaped gaslighting entirely. They still feel the sting, they still stumble, but they are no longer living entirely inside the old script. They are writing new lines, however shaky, however small. And that is the essence of the turning point. Not perfection, not constant confidence, but the simple act of pausing, noticing, and believing yourself, even in the face of denial. Jung wrote that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it directs our lives, and we call it fate. Family gaslighting wants to remain unconscious, disguised as fate, disguised as personality, disguised as weakness. Awareness pulls it into the light, and once you see it, fate begins to shift. In the next part, we'll explore what it looks like to practice this awareness in daily life. How small acts, pauses, boundaries, self-regard become practices that slowly rebuild trust in your own reality. And how even when setbacks come, those practices can anchor you in ways that gaslighting cannot erase. Awareness is a spark, but a spark alone doesn't change a life. To weaken the grip of family gaslighting, awareness has to become practice, something lived in the small, ordinary moments of every day. And practice, at first, feels unnatural. It goes against years of training. It feels like speaking a language you only half remember. Take Maya. After years of collapsing into doubt, she has started a new ritual. When her partner denies a promise, "I never said that," she feels the old panic rise. Her chest tightens, her mind races to gather proof, but instead of launching into defense, she takes one breath and answers, "I remember it differently." The silence that follows feels unbearable. She wants to fill it, to prove, to argue, but she doesn't. She sits with the discomfort. Later, alone, she writes the moment down in her journal. Not for evidence, not for a future fight. For herself. For the child inside her who never had anyone to say, "I believe you." Each time she does this, the silence gets a little easier to bear. She's practicing self-trust. Daniel's practice looks different. At work, he still hears the old script, "You misunderstood me." For years, those words sent him into a spiral of blame. Now, he pulls out his small notebook. There, in his own handwriting, are the notes he took. Dates, words, contradictions. He reads them quietly before moving on. This doesn't stop his boss from contradicting himself. It doesn't even stop the sting, but it steadies Daniel. Because the notebook reminds him, my memory is not broken. My perception has weight. Lena's practice is gentler still. Raised on the refrain, you're too emotional, she has spent decades apologizing for her feelings. Now, when she feels tears rise, she places her hand over her chest and whispers, it's okay to feel what I feel. At first, she barely believes the words, but she repeats them anyway. And slowly, something shifts. The tears no longer bring shame. They bring relief. Carl Rogers would call this unconditional positive regard, the act of accepting yourself without condition. For Lena, this is a daily rebellion against the family's denial. These practices are not flashy. They don't look like breakthroughs. They look like pauses, notebooks, whispers in the quiet. But they matter. Because gaslighting doesn't unravel through confrontation alone. It unravels through repetition. Each time you pause, each time you write, each time you validate your own feeling, you are rewiring the pattern laid down in childhood. Verena Cast noted that change requires repetition. The old pattern doesn't disappear in one dramatic moment. It weakens slowly as the new pattern grows stronger. But practice is not smooth. It's uneven. Maya sometimes still falls into proving herself, scrolling through texts late into the night, desperate for evidence. Daniel sometimes still leaves meetings full of doubt, notebook forgotten, shame loud in his head. Lena sometimes still swallows her feelings before she catches it, the old reflex too fast to stop. This is the reality of change. It is messy, fragile, full of setbacks. And yet, even the setbacks are part of the process. Because every time they notice, even after the fact, they are strengthening awareness. They are making the unconscious conscious. The important shift isn't perfection, it's direction. Think about what better actually looks like. Not constant confidence, not a life free from doubt, but a life where the doubt no longer controls you, where recovery is quicker, where the shame doesn't stick as long. Maya notices that her partner's denials no longer consume her for days. The sting remains, but she finds her footing faster. Daniel sees that his log not only steadies him, but helps him spot patterns, realizing, perhaps for the first time, this was never about me. Lena discovers that when she validates her feelings, her friendships feel lighter. She doesn't need others to confirm her reality as desperately as before. These are not grand transformations. They are subtle shifts, but they matter. Because gaslighting thrives on silence and self-abandonment. Every act of self-trust, no matter how small, is resistance. Jung would say that individuation, the journey of becoming whole, depends on facing what was once denied. These practices are how wholeness begins, not by erasing the wound, but by learning to live differently in its presence. But here is the hardest truth. Practicing self-trust in a family that still gaslights you is exhausting. Because the pattern doesn't only live inside you, it lives around you. You may start to speak your truth, only to hear the same old chorus. That never happened. You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. And in those moments, the temptation is strong to collapse again, to believe them, to give up. This is why external support matters. A friend who listens without rewriting, a therapist who holds your story steady, a journal that cannot talk back. These are lifelines, anchors outside the family myth. Practice, then, is not about winning arguments. It's about refusing to abandon yourself, even when others do. So if you're in this place, trying to practice, stumbling, standing back up, know this: you're not failing. You're learning a new language after years of silence. Every pause, every note, every whispered affirmation is a step toward fluency in your own truth. In the next part, we'll look at what integration means, how these practices, repeated over time, begin to stitch together a new identity, how the fractured child, long denied, becomes part of a whole adult, and how individuation, the becoming of your true self, emerges slowly, steadily, through the work of practice. Gaslighting in families leaves a wound that is both invisible and lasting. It doesn't just steal confidence in the moment. It rewires how you see yourself, teaching you to abandon your own reality in order to keep the peace. But what we've seen so far, awareness, practice, small acts of self-trust, is that this wiring is not permanent. It can be reshaped, slowly, unevenly, but truly. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, bringing together the parts of ourselves that were once divided. Family gaslighting divides you. It tells you one thing while you feel another. It pits your inner voice against the outer story. Healing begins when those two voices are allowed to stand side by side. You begin to say, "I feel this, even if they deny it. I remember this, even if they rewrite it. I matter, even if they dismiss me." At first, those words feel shaky, but each repetition strengthens them, and each time you believe yourself, you reclaim a piece of what was taken. Think about what this means in daily life. You no longer apologize for every feeling that rises in you. You no longer dismiss your memories as unreliable just because someone else does. You no longer carry the whole weight of the family myth on your shoulders. Instead, you start to stand a little taller. You begin to trust that your inner compass is not broken. You see that the doubt was never proof of weakness. It was proof of survival. Alice Miller insisted that healing comes from reclaiming the child's truth. This is not about staying trapped in the past. It is about finally validating the experiences that were once denied. Only then can the child within you stop fighting for recognition and begin to rest. And when that happens, something extraordinary follows. You begin to live less out of reaction and more out of authenticity. You stop shaping yourself around denial. You stop carrying the endless burden of self-questioning. Gaslighting thrives on silence and shame. Healing thrives on voice and self-regard. Each time you speak your truth, even if only to yourself, you chip away at the structure that once defined you. Does it mean the family changes? Not always. Some parents will never admit what happened. Some siblings will never acknowledge the pain. The myth may remain intact for them, but it no longer has to remain intact for you, because the real power was never in convincing them. It was in believing yourself. And here's the paradox. When you stop abandoning your truth, the world itself begins to look different. Friendships feel lighter because you no longer demand constant validation. Workplaces feel less suffocating because you see the patterns instead of internalizing the blame. Relationships become clearer, not because they are perfect, but because you know where you end and the other begins. This is what individuation looks like in practice. Not some lofty idea, but a lived reality. The child who was told, "You're too sensitive," becomes the adult who honors their sensitivity as wisdom. The child who was told, "That never happened," becomes the adult who says calmly, "I remember it differently." The child who learned to doubt themselves becomes the adult who trusts again, quietly, steadily, day after day. And in that trust, the shame begins to loosen. The guilt begins to fall away. You see clearly that what happened to you was not proof of your weakness. It was proof of how deeply you needed connection and how far you would bend to preserve it. That bending kept you alive then, but you don't need it now. So here is the invitation. Pause for a moment. Think of a memory that has always haunted you, the one you were told was exaggerated, false, or not that bad. Instead of questioning it, honor it. Say to yourself, I believe me. It sounds small, but it is everything. Because once you believe yourself, the old family mirror loses its power, and in its place, a new mirror emerges, one held by you, reflecting back the truth that was always there. Gaslighting taught you to divide. Healing teaches you to unite. Gaslighting taught you to abandon yourself. Healing teaches you to return. Gaslighting taught you to doubt. Healing teaches you to trust. And in that return, that trust, that unity, you become whole again. This is not quick. It is not easy, but it is possible, and every step matters. So if you've ever wondered whether you can undo the training of childhood gaslighting, the answer is yes. Not perfectly, not overnight, but yes. Because what was once used against you, your sensitivity, your perception, your truth, is the very thing that will set you free. This is how the cycle ends. Not with their recognition, with yours. And from here, the journey continues. Because each act of trust in yourself lays another stone on the path of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you were always meant to be.